access to resources and digital tools designed to help local to global companies make moves for their businesses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/bankingforbusiness. And Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Walt Summers.
And I'm Elsa Chang. So far, very few people have been rolling up their sleeves to get the latest COVID-19 vaccines. That's according to the first data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, tracking demand for the new shots. NPR health correspondent Rob Stein has more.
Remember when people desperately scrambled for appointments and lined up around the block to get vaccinated against COVID? Well, those days are long gone. The vaccines have been getting less and less popular. And so far this year, that trend looks like it's continuing. According to the CDC data out today, only 2.8% of adults have gotten one of the updated vaccines since they became available about a month ago. And less than a quarter say they plan to get a new shot. Dr. Marcus Plesha is the Chief Medical Officer at the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials.
It's disappointing that we're not seeing the kind of uptake that we would like to for the COVID vaccines really across any of the groups.
But it's not entirely surprising. Most people don't worry about getting really sick or dying from COVID anymore, and there's still a ton of misinformation and distrust about the vaccines, even though they're very safe and effective at keeping people out of the hospital or dying.
It's clearly lost some of its urgency for people, and that's understandable, and I mean, that's a good thing because it's not as frightening. We've got a much better handle on COVID. We just can't be complacent.
Because COVID is still a big threat. Lots of people are getting knocked out of work, kids are missing school, and hundreds of people are still ending up in the hospital and even dying from COVID every week. COVID remains a bigger killer than the flu. Claire Hannon is the executive director of the Association of Immunization Managers.
We're still seeing hospitalizations and deaths from COVID, especially for those who are older, especially those with underlying conditions. So it is concerning. We have our work cut out for us to educate about the importance of the vaccine.
Even though new variants keep emerging, so far, the updated formulations of the new vaccines look like they make them a pretty good match for the strains that are circulating. While the federal government isn't paying for the vaccines for most people anymore, in short, people can get a COVID shot for free from pharmacies and doctors in their network. And the government is spending millions to try to provide the vaccine to at least some people who are uninsured. After all, another wave of COVID infections is expected this winter, along with the flu and RSV. Rob Stein, NPR News.
It's been 3 years since the Taliban took over and transformed everyday life in Afghanistan. New laws have restricted women from working, studying, or even speaking in public. But the Taliban have also been targeting a group of men, former law enforcement. Thousands of police officers and soldiers in the Afghan National Army, the ANA, are being targeted for being alleged American spies. NPR's Monica Evstatieva spoke to some of them.
When Hayatullah heard that the Taliban were getting close to his military base 3 years ago, he turned to his commanders, pleading for action.
What the hell is going on here? Let's do something. Let's go out and fight against him. But they say you are still young officer and you don't know anything. Just calm down and wait for my command.
They also told him, don't do anything. So when the Taliban entered the base, Hayatullah and his fellow Afghan army soldiers just stood and faced them.
They say if you give me the rifles, the pistols, we don't kill you for a few days. So go to your home.
And that's what he did. But Hayatullah said a crucial mistake by his commanders came back to haunt all of them. They didn't destroy any documents.
Right now the Taliban use from those information, those intelligence, those secrets to target the NA soldiers, the NA officers.
After they identify the soldiers, the Taliban pressures their local elders to give them up. In June, Hayatullah heard that 2 police officers had disappeared from a neighboring village, so he knew he was next.
My elders told me you are not safe anymore here. Go somewhere else.
So he fled to the capital, and he's not alone. There were more than 270,000 Afghan soldiers and police officers trained by American and NATO forces when the Taliban took over in 2021, according to the Brookings Institution. Now, many are being hunted for their affiliation with the West. Mohammed, a police officer, explains how the Taliban see former law enforcement.
They were collaborators for America. These forces are non-believers, a force for America. They're traitors, and they were trained by NATO.
He, like Hayatullah, is hiding in Kabul. Mohammed initially fled to Iran, but when he tried to stay there legally, he faced an impossible choice.
If you want to stay in Iran legally, you'll have to join our force on the border with Syria, or the government of Iran will return you to the Taliban. They work together.
He chose to sneak back into Afghanistan. He's now in hiding, like many other former police and soldiers. None of these men can work legally to support their families. Identifying themselves to any employer would put them in grave danger. Mohammed again.
Our children cannot go to school. Our women cannot go outside our homes. And the ruling power is now Taliban. In all government offices, the people who are in charge don't even know how to read or write.
It's a horrific situation if you're a wartime ally. If you're somebody who got a taste of democracy and want to hold on to that, that's not what it looks like in Afghanistan anymore.
Sean Van Diver is a veteran and the president and founder of Afghan EVAC, which helps Afghan wartime allies in the relocation process. He says they can get refugee visas, but it's very hard and time-consuming, even with a referral from an American in the military or an NGO. Still, a small number of Afghans continue to arrive in the United States.
The truth is that we've welcomed 165,000 Afghans into our community since August of 2021, and that's because this broad cross-section of America came together and has been pushing and pulling government to do the right thing.
Ryan Stern is a vet as well. He runs Brave Bull Rescue, which also helps resettle Afghans who work with America. He says leaving them in jeopardy will endanger American soldiers in future conflicts.
I am alive today because of the Afghans. I gave my word. I word to leave you behind. If that's how we treat people who we work with day in and day out for 20 years, what does that say when I want to do that again somewhere else? Who would believe me?
The Afghan Adjustment Act, meant in part to allocate more resources to help resettle Afghans still in Afghanistan, has bipartisan support. The bill has been stalled in Congress for over a year. Monika Evstatieva, NPR News.
It's WNYC. More All Things Considered coming your way. Much of Florida is bracing for the arrival of Hurricane Helene. Forecasters expect it to become a Category 3 storm or higher before making landfall tomorrow. Governor Ron DeSantis is urging residents to heed evacuation orders. We're going to get the latest on that just ahead on All Things Considered. Stay with us. News headlines are coming next. For the rest of tonight here in our area, we're likely to see showers here. Temperatures in the low 60s tonight. Tomorrow, rain is likely through the day as well. We'll have temperatures tomorrow reaching the mid-70s by the afternoon. Again, rain pretty much through the day. Thunderstorms are possible as well. And then looking into Friday, more rain is expected that day. Probably no thunderstorms, though. Temperatures in the low 70s that day. It's WNYC at just about 5:30.
Support for WNYC comes from BAM, presenting Frontera on November 8th and 9th. A new dance work from Dana Gingras and Animals of Distinction with a live score by Fly Pan Am. Tickets at BAM.org. NYU Skirball. Swiss director Milo Rau returns to New York City with Antigone in the Amazon, where ancient myth meets modern-day activism. 3 performances only, September 27th and 28th. More at nyuskirball.org. Leadership support for WNYC comes from the Jerome L. Green Foundation, a proud supporter of New York City's major cultural institutions, providing scholarships in the arts, education, and medicine.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. President Biden says he's at peace with his decision to exit the 2024 race. Appearing on ABC's The View today, Biden said he has every confidence in Kamala Harris to beat Donald Trump in the November election.
Look, she is smart as hell, number one. She's tough. She was a first-rate prosecutor. She is a United States Senator of significant consequence. And as vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do.
Biden added that he would have defeated Trump had he stayed in the race. Biden said he never fully believed claims that there was an overwhelming reluctance to his continuing his campaign, despite at the time of his announcement, dozens of Democrats had called for him to step aside. The United States is announcing an additional $424 million in humanitarian aid for Sudan. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports a yearly year-and-a-half-long civil war there has been a major focus of the UN General Assembly this year.
U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield says people have a tendency to turn away from mass suffering. It's called the compassion collapse, and she's worried this is what's happening in the case of the war in Sudan.
As we sit here today, more than 25 million Sudanese face acute hunger. Many are in famine, some reduced to eating leaves and dirt to stave off hunger pains.
11 million people have fled their homes in what she describes as the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet. Thomas-Greenfield calls it a senseless war that began as a power struggle between 2 rival generals. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the United Nations.
At the close on Wall Street today, the Dow was down 293 points. This is NPR.
And it's on WNYC in New York. I'm Sean Carlson. 67 degrees at 5:32. Mayor Eric Adams says the recent high turnover of some of his top officials is normal. Adams spoke on the 94.7 Jonesy in the Morning radio show this morning.
People normally don't stay for these full terms in government because of the stress on their family.
School Chancellor David Banks, who recently had his home searched by the FBI, says he'll stay on until December before stepping down. Adams says he got a heads up from Banks at the start of this year that he was looking for other job opportunities. New York City Health Commissioner Ashwin Vasan announced he is resigning by early next year to spend more time with his family. FDNY Commissioner Laura Kavanaugh stepped down this summer, citing family reasons as well. The mayor's comments come as his administration faces multiple federal investigations involving top city officials. MTA crews spent hours trying to figure out the source of a leak in the Queens Midtown Tunnel earlier this month. Officials now say a worker finally cracked the case by tasting the water pouring in from the tube's ceiling. The worker noticed the water tasted salty, which ruled out the possibility it was coming from a broken water main. Crews determined it was flowing in from the East River after a construction crew drilling from a barge cracked a hole in the tunnel. The East River is salty because it's technically not a river at all, but instead a mighty tidal estuary that connects the Long Island Sound to New York Harbor. The problem forced the MTA to close the tunnel for hours while they made repairs. Officials say there's no lasting damage to the 83-year-old tube. It might be time to take out that umbrella. After several weeks of dry weather, meteorologists are saying that New York can finally expect some significant rainfall tonight into tomorrow. Meteorologist Brian Simnecki says it won't be anything too extreme.
Generally, on average, for the New York City metropolitan area, we're looking at right around 1/4 of an inch of rainfall.
Still, the 5 boroughs have not seen that much water since September 7th. Meteorologists say the rain comes courtesy of a cold front moving through, but things should dry out Friday. There will be a slight chance of showers again on Saturday. A look at our transit situation at this hour. Many subway lines are delayed. Be sure to check MTA's website before commuting this evening. Right now, there are up to 30-minute delays in and out of New York Penn Station due to an Amtrak derailment. NJ Transit tickets are being cross-honored with private carrier buses and PATH trains. On the roads, we have a crash on the Bruckner Expressway westbound near White Plains Road. The left lane is currently blocked. Again, yes, rain is on the way. It certainly looks like rain is on the way out there. We'll see temperatures tonight in the low 60s in our area. You're listening to WNYC. It's Wednesday at 5:30.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Amazon Business, committed to being a digital purchasing solution for businesses, so that growing the business is the main focus and not admin and paperwork. Learn about smart business buying at amazonbusiness.com. And the Council for Interior Design Qualification, whose mission is to assess practitioner competency to create design solutions that safeguard public health, safety, and welfare. Learn more at cidq.org/NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. Hurricane Helene has moved into the Gulf of Mexico as it takes aim at Florida. People there have been rushing through last-minute preparations and heeding evacuation orders ahead of what's forecast to be a major hurricane. NPR's Debbie Elliott joins us now from Apalachicola, Florida. Hi, Debbie.
Hi there.
Hi. Okay, so what is the latest at this point on where Helene is headed and what it may bring?
Well, it's out over the warm surface waters of the Gulf of Mexico right now, just getting stronger. Already the outer bands of this storm are affecting the state. Forecasters say we should expect rapid intensification before landfall in Florida's Big Bend region sometime tomorrow evening. This is where the Panhandle, meets the peninsula of Florida. Now, the National Hurricane Center has Helene on a track to develop into a major hurricane. So you're talking about destructive winds, heavy rainfall that will certainly cause flooding, and of course that life-threatening storm surge. And that's really the story here, because this system is just so wide, and it's expected to get bigger as it moves over the Gulf and gets closer. So even far from the eye of the storm, it's going to push this wall of water crashing into the Gulf Coast, stretching from here in Apalachicola and the Panhandle all the way down the west coast of Florida. That has Governor Ron DeSantis warning people not to get too caught up in the forecast track for Helene making landfall.
This is a really big storm. You're going to see impacts up to 250 miles outside the center of the storm. And the way the storms work, it's the eastern side of the storm that is usually the most severe.
So you're looking 10 to 15 feet of a storm surge here in Apalachicola, the potential for 20 feet just to the east of here in the Big Bend.
Oh my God. Well, people in Florida are certainly practiced at hurricanes, right? So what are officials doing there to prepare right now?
Right. The governor's declared a state of emergency. That means resources are being staged, search and rescue teams with high water vehicles and boats, helicopters, crews that will remove debris and fix downed power lines. Practically the whole state, other than just a few counties in the far western Panhandle, are under some kind of tropical warning or another. That's tens of millions of people. There are lots of closures, the University of Florida, Florida State, local schools. Also, some vulnerable healthcare facilities are moving people to safety. Airports are halting operations. And then evacuations. Here in Apalachicola, I ran into Franklin County Sheriff A.J. Smith. He was making rounds in his pickup truck. This entire county is under a mandatory evacuation order, and he's bracing for a heavy hit.
We don't have a loss of life, but very easily could. We're going to have high winds, we're going to have high water, power lines will be down, trees will be down. It's going to be a dangerous place to be for a little while.
We're right here on the waterfront in downtown Apalachicola. Do you expect to have storm surge coming in?
Oh yeah, we'll have at least 4 feet of water here, maybe more. All this will be underwater where we're sitting right now.
Well, Debbie, I understand that you spent some time along the coast today. How are people managing right now?
They're boarding up buildings. They're putting the sandbags around their doors. Here in Apalachicola, it's kind of a ghost town. I've been looking out on the riverfront here. People have been moving shrimp boats and other fishing vessels out of harm's way. Workers at the 13 Mile Seafood are rushing to get everything secure and put away. They had a customer buying ice, Jack Zingarelli. He said he was not evacuating.
Never have. We've been here for 72 years. We never boarded up nothing.
Despite the hardened old-timers, this is a serious storm and people need to prepare.
Indeed. That is NPR's Debbie Elliott in Apalachicola, Florida. Thank you so much, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Again to Lebanon, where Israeli airstrikes targeting the militant group Hezbollah have intensified this week. Monday's death toll alone was over 500 people. That's the highest daily count since the 1982 invasion of Lebanon. Israel and Hezbollah have been fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border since the Gaza war began. Hezbollah took a small group of journalists today to the Bekaa Valley, where Israel has been attacking. NPR's Jane Aref was with them and joins us now from Beirut. Hey, Jane.
Hi there.
So, Jane, Israel struck that region again today. Tell us what you saw.
We were taken to hospitals where the wounded were brought from strikes yesterday and today. One hospital had received 100 wounded in 24 hours. Now, Hezbollah has bases in the Bekaa, and support from them there is very strong. There were airstrikes in the area while we were there, including a forested area that was still burning. The sites themselves had clearly been hit from the air. The buildings had totally collapsed, and there was only twisted metal and concrete rubble. We didn't get a lot of details about what had happened there, but at the hospitals we met relatives of the wounded.
When did you hear from those people?
Well, the patients that we saw in two hospitals in the Baalbek area were civilians. The hospitals treat everyone, fighters and civilians, without asking who they are. And quite a few of those wounded were children. In one room, there was a 7-year-old boy and his 8-year-old brother, bandaged and clearly in pain. The boys, though, were chanting support for Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, prompted by their father a little, but for all of that, quite enthusiastically. We tried to ask the younger boy for a t-shirt, but he kept coming back to the chants.
You know, I've got to say, Jane, it's striking to me hearing that young boy chanting in support of Hezbollah's leader doesn't sound like something one would typically hear.
No, it's something one would hear for the cameras, and that might have been staged, but the children's injuries certainly weren't. Even on a guided press tour as well, there are things you can't stage. We were allowed to talk to other patients alone, and that's where we met a shop owner who had just come from burying his 2 sons, plus his brother and a cousin, all killed in airstrikes yesterday. He was visiting his daughter, who was severely wounded. He said his boys, almost 15 and almost 20, were sitting under a tree and then took cover in a building nearby, thinking they'd be safe. And the airstrike hit the building. He said there was no Hezbollah presence nearby. And then he said this.
Before we were not with Hezbollah. Now we are. After this, I want to beg the fighters to accept me to go and fight Israel. Every honorable Lebanese will say this. I lost the most valuable thing to me. What more can I lose? My life?
Lebanon, of course, is not just Hezbollah, but the Iran-backed group since 1982 has repelled Israeli invasions, of course, at a huge cost. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to persuade the Lebanese people that Hezbollah is placing them in danger. But really, the more civilians who are killed here, particularly children, the more Hezbollah gains support in a lot of places.
Jane, how is the Lebanese government responding to these attacks?
It's really quite fragile, the Lebanese state. Long-running economic crisis, no fully functioning government, in fact, and a large number of Syrian refugees, it says, are overwhelming the country. In one of the hospitals, we met an 18-year-old Syrian looking after his uncle, who was seriously wounded and moaning in pain. They had been living in and working in a car wash, which was hit. They came fleeing the war in Syria a decade ago, but instead of safety, war found them here.
NPR's Jane Aref, thank you.
Thank you.
This is NPR News.
Mayor Adams' signature City of Yes housing plan is officially one step closer to, well, yes. The City Planning Board approved the mayor's plan to loosen New York's residential zoning code to allow for denser developments and help alleviate a long-standing housing crisis. Next step is the City Council, where the political fight over the contentious proposal is expected to heat up. WNYC's David Brand is here to tell us all about it. Okay, David, before we get into the nitty-gritty here, just remind listeners, what exactly is City of Yes?
Well, you said it. It's a plan to change the zoning rules all over the city to add, as the mayor likes to say, a little more housing in every neighborhood. So that means places that are currently zoned for single-family homes, those detached homes on a little lot, a little yard. These rule changes could allow those homeowners to add an additional apartment, maybe in their basement or their garage, or to put up a cottage in the back. In higher density locations could allow for larger development, bigger apartment buildings than current zoning rules allow, also ease the conversion of offices or hotels into permanent housing. So it is a sweeping plan that would really affect every part of the city.
As we said, the City Planning Board approved the plan today. Was that expected?
Yeah, that's no surprise. City planning has been one of the main drivers of this plan. You know, they made the plan. And so this City Planning Commission, they approved this plan by a 10-3 vote. It's some modest changes, but it's going to the City Council now, and within the next 2 months, we should know the future of this plan.
Yeah, talk more about some of those modest changes to the initial proposal.
Yeah, so the big one involves campus development is what they call it. So taking like city-owned properties or faith-based properties. So the parking lot of a church, for example, they would allow for development on those grounds. The main change here is that they're removing NYCHA campuses from that infill development. So that's the biggest change that was made today.
The coalition backing City of Yes released a poll today. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this poll, it was conducted by a researcher from Princeton who serves at the good government group Reinvent Albany as a policy fellow. And he polled New Yorkers about different elements of the plan, like adding an extra unit on single-family zoning, or those conversions, or I mentioned the infill development. And a lot of those got favorable numbers. You know, it's different when you put a big plan to people and say, what do you think of all of these changes happening at once? People tend to be more reluctant. But when it was each individual thing like this, asked in individual questions, people tended to like them.
So I guess my next question then is, like, if these things poll well, the proposals themselves poll well, why is the plan expected to face such a tough road when the City Council takes it up?
Well, I think most basically, a massive change at one time is frightening to a lot of people. And this is, you know, a big package. It's like 1,400 pages. It affects every neighborhood. Opponents of the plan have some pretty visceral reactions to certain elements of it. So I mentioned that plan to allow homeowners of single-family and two-family homes to add another unit on their lots. That's provoking a lot of reaction from lower density communities. There's people who just straight up say, I don't want more people moving into my neighborhood. I moved into this because it's a more suburban style. Other people have a more nuanced take on it and say, well, what is that going to mean for parking or for sewer systems and other infrastructure? And that's, the parking is something that is also like prompting a pretty huge reaction from opponents, because one of the elements of this plan that is like the most controversial is this part of the plan that would eliminate mandatory parking requirements from new development. So currently new development above a certain number of apartments has to include certain off-street parking rules. This would eliminate those, so developers wouldn't have to include parking. Doesn't mean they would eliminate the parking, but they have that option.
Do we have any idea when the City Council will vote on the package? And what's council leadership had to say about the odds of that passing?
Well, it should happen like within the next 2 months or so, because after the City Planning Commission has this vote and certifies the vote, they send it to the council for review. There's going to be a public hearing followed by a committee vote that's likely to take place in mid to late November. And then the final council vote will probably occur in either late November or early December. This plan is still subject to change. You know, you have 51 council members. They're all going to be negotiating different parts of the plan. There's parts that are more popular. There's parts that are less popular. There's people who are on the fence who probably think they can extract some concessions to appease their constituents. There's people who outright hate it. There's people who like it, but still might want to try to get some goodies for their district. So negotiations are really going to pick up now. In terms of council leadership, well, Council Speaker Adrienne Adams has been a big supporter of housing development and knows that the city's in a housing shortage and needs more apartments, more homes. She hasn't straight up said, I support City of Yes, but she supports the concept of adding more housing, and I think she's going to be trying to whip votes for this plan.
That's WNYC's David Brand. Thanks for the update.
Thanks a lot, Sean.
Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have said they'd get rid of income taxes on tips, and there are a lot of tip workers here in Las Vegas: rideshare drivers, bartenders, servers, and adult entertainers.
All my income is tips, so I can get away without paying taxes, which doesn't seem fair.
Driving around Nevada talking taxes and tips on the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
Weekday mornings on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by Sony Pictures, presenting Saturday Night, a new film from Jason Reitman. Told in real time, it chronicles the chaotic 90 minutes before the first Saturday Night Live went to air in select theaters Thursday.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Juana Summers. 51 years ago, the U.S. government created one of the largest benefits programs to help people with disabilities. But an NPR investigation found its rules are so complex and so out of date that the program ends up hurting people it's supposed to help, even putting their lives at risk. NPR investigative correspondent Joseph Shapiro explains.
This is a story about a woman who accomplished pretty much everything she ever wanted against the most incredible of odds. But now a government program that was key to her success is threatening to bring everything crashing down. Meet Tabby Haley.
People with spinal muscular atrophy like myself, living to my age already is a huge win.
She's 40. Until recently, it was rare to live that long with her form of muscular dystrophy. Now, medical breakthroughs make a longer life possible.
So I'm basically living on a thin line, and I want to be able to live